Bronze Barony Brassy Cross Line. It's a cross-genre story of steampunk and high fantasy. So again, the Bronze Barony Brassy Cross Line. Sir Lawrence Sixsmith walked the length of the train on top and leapt between moving cars as he kept an eye on the hills. Bronze Barony was an outlying province, but used to be green with rich old growth before the recent wars began. Now what wasn't burnt appeared to be more desert than woods or grasslands. Around the next bend, Law stood up straight and still. His body barely rocked from side to side, keeping his balance with the gyrations of the train cars. He watched the grand and terrible thing come into view. The smokestack above the engine belched out a thick black cloud of pure carbon smoke. The stuff trailed over and around Law where he stood. He held his breath, but didn't bother pulling up the cloth that was tied around his neck for his mouth and nose. He waited for the air to clear so he could witness the wreckage again. The fact that they were burning wood for dirty combustion instead of operating on the more efficient power of steam was a testament to how badly the war was going for the kingdom. The Dreadmore had crashed, and this Goliath of a machine brought down here in the foothills of the Grey Mountains was something to behold. It was a meaningful victory among many disappointing battles in the sky and on the ground. As the train rattled past the wreckage, Law pivoted on top. "May you never fly again," Law muttered under the wind of their travel. Whether he was talking to the grounded ship or the terrible lord who had commanded it, he wasn't sure. The decks of the thing had folded and wrinkled with the contours of the hills in a way that made no natural sense. The scale of the destruction was beyond understanding. Something this heavy, a thing made out of this much metal, had no business being in the sky. Once it succumbed to gravity, the ground and the natural order of things was not prepared to receive it. It did not sit within an impact crater exactly. The largest portion of the Dreadmore's ruptured hull had created a new ridge of rock and soil where it had pushed into the ground and plowed forward, obliterating hills older than time. As the train continued along the tracks and looped into the surviving foothills, Law spied the furrowed trail of destruction that extended for miles behind the crashed fortress. In a few of those uneven imprints, water had started to gather in what eventually would become a series of Finger Lakes. Law imagined a day when even the rusting pieces of the Dreadmore would be long gone, scavenged or buried. Long after this war was over, farmers or entire villages might form around these scattered lakes. Perhaps they would have no memory of this conflict. Law hoped that didn't mean he was living through the final days of the kingdom. He loved being a knight more than anything, but what he did not want to be was part of the last order of knights who failed to save the kingdom during its hour of greatest need. He shook his head, turned his face into the wind, and his back to the fallen ship of his enemy. He finished his patrol and dropped down to one of the platforms over the connector between two cars. Law searched out his fellow knights and found them: Sir Basil Dolphin and Sir Rowena Moody in one of the back cars, still staring out the window at the Dreadmore, which diminished in the mist of the Finger Lakes. He didn't care for the last cars of the train now that they were burning logs instead of using pure steam power. The dark, choking smoke tended to gather around the back cars and seep through the seams and windows. Everything smelled burnt and was coated with a fine dusty film of soot. Law had grown adverse to the smell of burnt things during the course of this war. His eyes lighted on Baz. Duster, gloves, and hat covered much of the scar tissue, but the burn marks along the left side of his face still showed. Healing potions had saved him from infection, but not from disfigurement. Of course, Law blamed himself for this and the loss of their ships in that battle. He forced himself to look away before Baz could notice him staring again. Roe took a deep breath of sooty air and asked, "Do you want me to take topside for a little while?" Law paused with eyes unfocused, but then shook his head. "We all need to eat and rest. We have to keep our strength up and our minds clear for what may come." "Maybe they forgot all about us," Baz said. "We'll slip right by like we are nothing important." Law rolled his eyes. "I'm glad you still have dreams. Let's go closer to the front so everything doesn't taste like smoke and char." The train rolled through the day, and the sun moved to the other side of the hills to sink into rest. The terrain was painted the color of drying blood, and the rails glowed as if fresh from the blacksmith's forge. That was the scene and the nature of the light as the train locked up on its brakes and nearly dumped the trio of knights into the floor. They all ran forward to see. Both Law and Roe leaped up between cars and pulled themselves onto the roof. There he was, standing dark and unmoving in the center of the tracks. Law stomped his boot on the roof, and Baz stuck his head out and up from the next doorway. Before he could ask, Law told Baz, "It's Lord Shrine, standing and waiting like the devil at the gates of hell. Go tell the engineer to continue full ahead no matter what else happens." Baz asked any signs of the "just go and tell him now," Law said. Baz burst through the next door and ran to the front. Roe and Law met eyes, and then they stepped off opposite sides of the moving train. As they hung on and leaned out, Lord Shrine, formerly the captain of the Dreadmore, stood with arms crossed, dark robes flapping in the wind and unmoving. Law drew his gun and fired. Roe matched his action from the other side. The brakes let up, and the engine started chugging again as it put back on speed. Shrine stepped casually off the tracks on Law's side and walked out through the scant grasses there. Roe climbed back on top, but not before Law let go and took a tumble on the ground. He retrieved his hat as he returned to his feet and trotted out toward Lord Shrine's back. The enemy appeared to be just strolling away, but Law wouldn't let up. He reloaded and locked the chamber into place. No sooner had he taken aim than Lord Shrine turned about and lifted hands enveloped in purple light. Law opened fire. Shrine shot out beams of light that slowed and deflected the bullets, which spun end over end into the light of the setting sun. Shrine followed up by firing energy at the lone knight, with the train chugging along behind him and away. Law fired his magicless bullets and was able to dissipate the energy from each attack from the wizard. Those attacks and counters worked both ways. As Law holstered his empty shooter, Shrine fired a few more balls of energy. Law drew his other sidearm and took care of those attacks as well. Shrine paused and smiled. "You should have stayed on your little train, Sixsmith. You don't want to be out here with me, not in day and certainly not at night." "Do you come here to pine for your lost ship?" Law asked, gun still in hand. "Or are you living in its rusting and collapsing lower decks still?" "It was a fine ship," Shrine said, "finer than the ones I took out from under you. The Navori took those from us for you." Shrine shrugged. "You'll run out of ammunition before I do." As if to demonstrate this, Shrine threw some more energy. Soon Law's second weapon clicked empty as Lord Shrine's hands still glowed with purple magic. "See, Sixsmith? I see better than you." The bullet tore through the wizard's shoulder. The sound of the shot arrived an instant after the wound. The light on his hands flickered and went out like a shorted wire. "I have friends," Law said as he holstered another empty weapon. "Unfortunately for you, so do I." Lord Shrine lowered a bloody hand from his wounded shoulder, and the purple energy returned, now tinged in red. Before the wizard could turn it against the knight, a cord drew up tight, and Law was snatched backward through the air like he had vanished. Shrine threw a bolt of energy after Law, and it was a close thing, but the magic died out before it reached him, and he reached the train. Roe helped Law unhook the line from the harness under his coat. Baz continued to aim the long rifle out from one of the windows, even though Shrine did not appear to be in pursuit. Eventually, Baz closed up the scope and joined the other knights on top of the train. "What do you think?" Baz asked. "Very nice shooting," Law said. Baz shrugged and laid the weapon across his lap. "Well, thank you, but I meant, what are your thoughts on Shrine's visit and what he has planned?" I could guess," Law said. Roe knelt down, but her head moved about on a swivel. "I would guess we aren't getting much sleep tonight." "I have little doubt that the Navori is out here," Law said. "With the Dreadmore down, Lord Shrine would never face us like that unless the beast were at hand, and I believe that is what's next. Lord Shrine would have us roll into Brassy Cross with nothing but flames trailing behind the metal platforms of the destroyed cars." Roe began, "When do you think we should expect?" Flame boiled up into the darkened air from beyond the next hill up ahead and on the same side of the tracks where Lord Shrine had gone. At least one of them is left behind, Baz said. Now we just have to deal with the beast. The fire blazed out again as an illuminating arc from the great lizard's mouth. The beast had crawled onto a hill. One claw rested at an awkward angle on the ruins of what might have been a temple, observatory, or some other dome structure. Whatever it was, not much of it remained. One great wing flopped over the front of the hill like a leathery blanket. It extended its neck and opened its jaws to roar. At the last moment of that ground-shaking echo, more fire belched forth. The Navori's spikes reflected that glow all along its back. Law would always think of this monster by the name given it by his ancestors within the kingdom. This was the dragon Brimstone. As Law opened his mouth to give the order, Lord Shrine's voice echoed from the direction of the great and terrible dragon. I have come to end you all. There will be no saving the villages you have lost. There will be no putting your kingdom back together again. This is the end of the line for you and the wretched king you serve. Another burst of fire revealed Lord Shrine mounted upon a harness on the dragon's back. Brimstone took to the air and sprayed the tracks ahead in fire as it passed over. The grass on both sides blazed. The cross ties were blackened at the point of attack. While the rails glowed a shimmering red, the train rushed over the heated sections of track with no apparent trouble. A few sparks flew out from under the cars. The flames passed on both sides with a whoosh as the train barreled onward past the dragon. The beast circled and gained on the train from behind. Lord Shrine hissed out the order, "Finish them." The final car in line at the back of the train burst open as if exploding in a delayed reaction from the fire they had long passed. The undoing of that car surprised even the dragon, who allowed his unspent fire to weaken within his mouth as he watched. A cloud of black smoke from the train engine swallowed the destruction for a moment. Brimstone had no discomfort or concern about the smoke passing over him. Lord Shrine, however, covered his face with his robes as the smoke trailed over him. By the time it cleared, it was too late for the pair to not be caught off guard. The airship, with balloons fully inflated and covered in scales of protective material, rose from that opened car to a position above the dragon's path. Brimstone banked and cut hard to the right with a fireless roar. Dark smoke of its own bled out of the beast's flared nostrils. It reacted so sharp and low to the ground that its wings tore away some of the grass and scattered the dull stones from one side of the rail bed. The three knights on board the refurbished airship Tarpon worked together to skirt close to the dragon's spiked side and to unload a barrage of exploding harpoons against the dragon's scales. The bursts from the artillery struck a little high along its back and missed the vulnerable connection of its wing, which they had exploited in previous battles. Even still, the attack sent the monster skidding along its belly on the ground away from the train. Dirt, stones, and sod ripped up into the air on both sides of the beast like waves splashed up from the ocean. The furrowed trail left behind by the dragon before it took to the air, roaring again, reminded Law very much of the crash site of Lord Shrine's favorite airship. Law turned the wheels and levers with furious speed as he asked, "Did you aim high because you were trying to blast Lord Shrine off the lizard's back?" Rose turned her head just long enough to give a quick smile. Law brought the ship around to stay in tight pursuit of the dragon and the wizard on its back. Brimstone launched itself straight up, but Law was already tilting the nose and bringing the side around to give Baz a shot at the monster that had burned him. Baz tried launching the chain nets at the dragon's wings. Law sighed as he pumped up the boilers and powered up close behind the beast. Baz had tried this before in the past, back when all three of them still had their own airships. It had not gone well. This time Baz hit the wings dead on and folded them together in a tangle of chains and weights. The beast twisted straight up through the air on the momentum of its last flap. Then it tumbled forward and down. Roe cried out, "The tail, pull back." Law was quick to reverse thrust and release steam to save the tarpon. Still, it was close. The spiked tail missed tearing away the balloon and maybe half the hull, too. The turbulence of the passing tail from the falling dragon shook the entire ship and the 3 knights on board. As the quake passed, Ro asked, "Did you get a little excited there?" "It wasn't that close," Law said, knowing she knew it was a lie. The dragon struck hard and spilled between the hills as it thrashed from side to side, trying to free its tangled wings. "Get us closer," Baz shouted. "We can finish them both off." Law continued to rise and turn, though. The dragon spied them above with its jagged eyes. Fire erupted from its mouth. The wash of flames hid the beast and turned the entire universe around them into darkness by comparison. The heat struck them like a wall, but the fire itself died just short of the shielded belly of the airship. "You forget about the fire there, Baz?" Ro asked. "I never forget. Just want it done," he said as he reloaded a few launchers. The dragon leapt into the air with its wings still useless behind it. The beast continued to rise, though, from the strength of its powerful legs. "Law," Ro shouted. "I see it," he said, even though it still wasn't moving. He still wasn't moving them up or away fast enough. The claws almost missed, but Brimstone whipped itself over by twisting its long neck down and away as it threw its tail to the side. This gave him just enough extra reach to claw away several boards from the side and bottom of the ship. As the dragon and the wooden planks fell back to earth, Law noted that if they were sailing on the sea instead of the air, they would sink. Even still, they could not afford too many more strikes like that before the ship would come apart and they would be the ones falling back to the ground. "We need to continue the attack while the train gets away," Law said. Baz called out, "Bring us around again. Ignore the dragon for a moment." "Why would we do that?" Ro called as she aimed a harpoon launcher downward. Baz said Lord Shrine wasn't on Brimstone's back any longer. "If he's hurt or even dazed, we need to try to finish him off. We may not be able to bring down the dragon for good, but we might be able to rid ourselves of a wizard tonight." Law acted on Baz's suggestion without a word. He swung the vessel out wide and closer to the ground beyond the next set of hills. As they circled, Ro kept an aim on the dragon, but for the moment the beast had occupied itself with the problem around its wings. "I don't see him," Baz said as he ran from one railing of the deck to the other. A blast of purple energy tore through the night air over their heads. It severed a couple ropes, and Law moved quickly to adjust the other connections. Ro turned her aim from the more distant dragon to the lone wizard, firing his energy up at them. "There he is." Ro fired a volley of harpoons at the ground as if strafing the side of the dragon again. They blew up in a rolling arc of explosions. Lord Shrine tried to dive out of the way, but he was lifted into the air and slammed down to the ground. He did not land with as much grace as the dragon. "Take the helm, Ro," Law ordered. She seemed reluctant to hand the armaments over to Baz solely, but she replaced Law at the wheels anyway. They all knew she was the more skilled flyer. Law hooked a line to the harness under his coat and jumped up onto the railing. "What are you doing?" Ro did her best to hold the ship steady. Finishing this, he dove off the side and fell toward the ground. The line started to hum and vibrate as the dark grassland rushed to meet him. He jerked a little as the pulleys above arrested his fall. Law's boots set down gently. He lifted up on the line again for a moment, but then came down on his feet and stalked forward. Shrine lifted his head slowly and extended one shaking fist with dim purple light around it. Law drew one of his sidearms. There was a twang from above, and Law expected to be lifted away, but another heavy chain net wrapped up the wizard and sent him tumbling across the ground. Lord Shrine struck his head and went limp next to a small outcropping of rock. It hardly seemed honorable, but this was war, so Law drew back the hammer on his firearm and took aim. He saw the blinding light from his side before he heard the roar of the onrushing dragon that had finally freed its wings. Law soared into the air himself as the line drew up with all its power. He was shocked at how fast and high he was going. He started to fear they were going to launch up past the balloons toward the stars. His ascent started to slow, and Baz caught him around the shoulders to keep Law from slamming into the hull. Rowe continued to raise the ship higher into the air as Law climbed over the railing and unhooked his line. Going straight up was one of the dragon's old tricks. He probably knew it and would follow. But as the three of them watched over the side, the dragon sprayed the ground around Lord Shrine. "Does he think you're still down there?" Baz asked. The wizard flew up out of the fire, surrounded in purple light, as his robes burned away. The knights could hear him screaming even from their great height. Brimstone seized Shrine in one claw and slammed the wizard back to the scorched earth. The dragon clawed, bit, and continued to rain down fire onto the wizard between his feet. Law took the wheels again and circled them away so they weren't over the dragon anymore, but they stayed out on the scene. When Brimstone ceased his attack, there was nothing left of Lord Shrine. The dragon shook itself like a dog shedding water. Purple light sprinkled off the dragon's scales. When it turned its eyes on the ship above, the shape of the eyes had changed. In the light of the surrounding fires and the grasses, the knights could see that dragon's scales had also changed from a gray-white non-color to a nearly emerald green. "What happened?" Baz asked. The dragon roared up at them, but there was no fire. It took flight and rose up and away over the gray mountains, away from the kingdom and the war. "Was the dragon under Lord Shrine's spell?" Rowe asked. Law answered, "That would explain a lot, but I don't know." Baz let out a long exhale. "If it's true, Shrine is gone and the dragon wouldn't be done fighting us for him." Law shook his head as he steered them back along the path of the train tracks. The drag from the missing boards shook the ship. He was hopeful, but didn't want to say anything out loud. They would need to tell the king what they had seen. The king, his advisors, and sages loyal to the kingdom would have to make sense of it. They had another mission for now. A village that had been cut off for a long time needed supplies. Maybe they could offer hope as well. The airship descended as it matched pace with the train, cutting through the night. They could land back into the cradle in that last train car on the end, but Law kept the boilers going and guarded the train from above for now. Like his fellow knights, he enjoyed the view from the air and the feel of racing through the sky by the power of steam.